So I was asked to talk today about an emerging field of research in the social sciences, a field which has now given birth to international research projects, to university chairs, to academic institutes and specialized professional journals. In other words, there's quite a large research agenda out there, a research agenda which is in its infancy, but which grows at a very fast pace. Its main focus is the question of whether or not the modern information and communication technologies, or ICTs, have an impact on political participation. And so the task that I was given today is a difficult one. I have worked quite extensively on, and I'm still in the process of doing so, on a very limited portion of this field, namely on internet voting. But I will naturally touch upon internet voting today, but remain very brief on this topic, especially given the fact that we'll have other people talking about internet voting later, and that the title of my talk is E-Participation. I changed it a little bit from what you have in the program and call it the wider picture. So an awful lot has been said and written about the rise of a so-called e-democracy. Now the same goes for the topic of e-government and many other public affairs to which the E prefix has been added. Amongst others, I will do this as well today by adding the E to participation. And it is, however, rather puzzling that there is not much scholarly work given the overall interest in this topic. And there's not much in the literature that has been produced so far, compared to, say, other fields of party democracy or other fields. This is, of course, both good and bad. It is bad because often one has to start from scratch, but it's also fascinating and creative, both theoretically and empirically, because one actually can start from scratch. So when assessing the e-participation and beyond question within what, half an hour, we have to restrict ourselves. ICTs do potentially impact on any aspect of democracy, and within democracy on any aspect of participation. Electoral processes can be affected, transnational protest can be affected, transparency and opacity of policy making can be affected. Interest groups, parties, businesses, civil society, and individual citizens' participation to these processes can be affected. Citizens' interests in politics, levels of political education, organizational structures of any political actor, their public communication, media coverage of politics, international relations, internal and external security, government structures, and I could go on. All of these are potentially affected by technological developments. Let me therefore propose to concentrate on e-participation by a particular part of this whole, namely by the citizens. So first, a quick overview of my talk. I'll start off what this was, the introduction. I'll start by the conclusion, in a sense, the main effect of e-participation that I can think of. Then I will look 4 years back and then 12 years ahead, and briefly talk about a virtual electronic platform and its progress, and finish off with the wider picture of participation if we can attend. I will, throughout the entire talk, try to give you as many practical examples that exist, that I came across and I know of, and was working on as well, that might be useful to our discussions. So let me then start with the conclusion of my talk. Here is what I believe can be identified as the most important overall effect of modern information and communication technologies on political participation. In modern liberal democracies, the key moment for political participation by the citizen was traditionally and is currently and will also remain in the near future elections. This is also the moment when political participation is highest among the people. In the run-up to elections, there's a little theoretical graph. In the run-up to elections, the campaign leads to political participation in that people are exposed to mobilization efforts by the parties and the candidates, as well as to the media coverage, which in turn leads to an increased political awareness and discussion among citizens. The peak is reached with the elections themselves, but political participation usually quickly fades away again after the results, and depending on the case, the government formation or coalition formation are known. Note, of course, that there is not a zero political participation between these two elections here, as you can see. We're not at zero level. The French political scientist Bernard Manin has pointed out in the mid-90s that what a famous economist called Schumpeter once called upon the elitist model of democracy, according to which basically citizens are called to express themselves every now and then, every 3, 4, 5 years at the polls, and then can forget about politics again for the next 4 years, because then their representatives take over and do the job of politics without them. Bernard Manin showed that this is not really working. The space between elections is not politically void of citizens. They form their opinion and they participate in non-electoral forms of politics, such as within social movements, in protest actions, and so on. From my point of view, however, what the E prefix to participation really does primarily is to gradually fill this space. If you want, this is, from my point of view, the biggest effect of the internet, of ICTs on participation. One could also say that the internet has the effect of making political participation by citizens more balanced across time. One could even go a step further and predict that the relative importance of elections will diminish in the future. In any case, I trust that this continuity in political participation will be increased, and we can see that it is increased between these traditionally most important moments in democratic life, the elections themselves. Now, do we have indications that this is already happening? Well, let me use as a heuristic tool a little model that I had the honor of presenting some 4 years ago to the presidents of national parliaments of the over 40 member states of the Council of Europe. And back then, in my 15-minute talk in Strasbourg, I developed a little vision, the vision of elections in 2020, in 12 years' time, in a modern liberal democracy. And I will not go into details here, as this has been published already, and those who are interested in what I call the virtual election platform, or VEP, can simply send me a mail, and I'll forward them my short piece. But let me briefly go through this, as it will show how political mobilization might become more permanent through especially the internet. This little vision had to do with elections, but it looked at the before elections and at the after elections, and let's say between elections as well. In my hypothetical country, I was speaking of the internet had become omnipresent for its citizens in 2020. There was high-speed Wi-Fi that covers the entire country and which is free of charge. And I am again here today in Estonia, a country I started to like a lot over the past few years, and funnily enough, thinking about it now, my imaginary country resembles quite a lot to the current situation in Estonia already. In any case, this country also has this web, which is freely available on the World Wide Web, and this web contains 4 major modules. Smart, what I called back then Smart Vote module, an MP monitoring module, a multimedia blog module, and an internet voting module. For the Smart Vote module, in a nutshell, this allows people to answer a list of questions online or statements. They take position vis-à-vis statements, policies, options, which have beforehand been answered by experts and party leaders and candidates. And the system, what the system then does, it matches your preferences, the citizens, with the preferences or the offer, if you want, the political offer on the party side. And therefore tells you how close or how far you are from the political offer, the parties that are running in the elections. The MP Monitor module is one which automatically registers all roll call behavior of MPs during their term in Parliament, which builds up some kind of objective profile of each MPs and or of party groups' political actions during the legislature. So if Silver, for example, is voting in favor or against the law, the system in Parliament, the system retrieves that data and makes it available in this module here. The multimedia blog module offers the citizens the opportunity to discuss their opinions with fellow citizens or candidates, posting new videos, chats, etc., audio, text. And this is structured in various issue-specific channels. Citizens may share their previously stored political profiles with others and provide justifications for their choices. The internet voting module, of course, then allows the citizens to vote online. And of course, nobody is forced to use this method of voting. In 2020, the traditional forms of voting will still prevail. Postal voting will also exist. But in our hypothetical European country, you will be allowed to basically vote from anywhere over a period of time over the internet. Now, quickly, what would be the effects of this? Basically, I'll offer 6 potential effects. This could boost electoral participation. Internet voting does not do that just now, not really, but it could at some point. Voting will become much simpler and user-friendly. In addition, political offers congruence with the demand can be maximized by the customer, him or herself, a fact which might attract more customers. The electoral participation boost, we don't see that just yet. But we think that this could happen, nevertheless. After some time, you see the tax, Silver was talking about the tax system that was used at the beginning by 2% of the population. Now it's what, 75, 80%? 87% even by now. It's every day. So every time I come to Estonia, it's like 20% more of people. Almost everybody uses it now. So such kind of diffusion effects could also well take place, especially in conjunction with other modules. That we don't have just yet. We'll come back to that in the conclusion. Secondly, the representatives could be held more easily accountable. Now I miss my glasses. Where are they? This is getting worse. No, they're here. Representatives could be held more easily accountable for their acts between elections. Promises could be easily and permanently checked against action. And this would be the case if we think of the web as a permanent platform where virtual contracts almost could be set up between the elected and the electors. One could imagine an early warning system alerting individual voters about a deviant behavior by their representatives. Say I elect Silver or a party on the basis of my congruence with the political profile, my political profile and the one of Silver. Now, during the legislature, Silver starts to voting contrary to his promises. he said, I'm against atomic or against nuclear energy, and I voted because of this for him, and he starts voting for bills in favor of nuclear energy. Well, you know, over time, he would score badly, and one could imagine that as soon as the score of Silver's promises and actual behavior, as soon as this score goes below, say, 80%, then I will get an email alert telling me that Silver is not representing me anymore because he's doing other things now. And so this would be like some giving him a yellow card. And these yellow cards, of course, could then be turned into red ones at the next election, as I would simply not vote for Silver anymore, and would send him off the political pitch, punishing him for his reckless behavior and broken promises. But to carry on with this imperfect footballistic metaphor, I would say that the importance here is not that elections are becoming like the penalty shootouts, the moment in which the real decisions are taken, but that there is a 120, in this case, minute game preceding this decision, and what happens during this game is absolutely crucial. Thirdly, the lack of civic education, consequently of civic competence, could be potentially improved. The permanent multimedia monitoring system could increase my interest in politics and therefore my knowledge about it. And here again, the emphasis is on the permanence of the system. Fourth, some additional institutional reforms could improve the congruence between voters and their representatives. If we imagine a system in which a certain proportion of MPs could be elected by voters in other constituencies within the same country. For European elections, for example, it might well be that an Italian voter finds out that the largest congruence he or she has is actually with a Finnish or a Portuguese candidate or party rather than the Italian one. Being able to vote for them would probably decrease the voter's frustration as his or her personal utility function would be maximized. Fifth, let me think of something that is dear to us in Switzerland, direct democracy. A permanent web could quite easily allow citizens with similar political opinions to launch initiatives or ask for referendums to be held. If voters' profiles would get, on a voluntary basis, of course, made publicly available, a system could also match the profiles among people, and which would then reveal the critical masses needed for political action. Finally, one can only speculate about the effects of a web on substantive politics, but if we assume that candidates or parties want to maximize congruence of their profiles with as many as possible voters, and we know they do, this would probably emphasize the center bias in the spectrum of the political offer. Well, this does not really need to be the only strategy of candidates and parties, as one could also imagine polarization effects due to strategies of branding themselves at the extremes of certain policy dimensions. In any case, the jury is not out there. It's out there, but we don't know yet the decision of that jury on this topic here. Now, the very intriguing thing here, which intrigued me 4 years ago, which still intrigues me, is that all of the individual elements of this web, of this futuristic platform, they already exist. All the modules that I have described do exist nowadays. They have just not been put together just yet. Smart voting techniques, they exist, they have been applied in the Netherlands, in Switzerland, Finland, Germany, Belgium, Bulgaria, the US, in Estonia I think even it exists as well, and in many other places. Interestingly enough, in the Swiss and in the Dutch case, they were even competing smart voting modules that were offered to the citizens. And there were millions of people using that. In Switzerland, it was at the last federal elections, out of an electorate of 4.5 million people, there was 1 million people using this. Enormous. Almost a quarter of the electorate was using that. In the Wahlomat in Germany a few years ago, it was 5 million Germans that used it. In the Dutch case, 1.7 million used Kies Kompass. These are enormously important figures here, and have to do with the fact that if you, that's also commenting slightly on what Silver said before, if you give the vote to something instead of wanting things from them, if you give them the opportunity to find out more about themselves, for example, where they stand in politics and how they match with the political offer, how they match even with fellow citizens, then they're curious. People are not, it's wrong to say that people are not interested in politics just because participation rates in elections go down generally. People are interested and they're curious, and as soon as you give them something, they will take it. Now, these voting advice applications, as we call them now, the VAAs, this is for informing you about that. We want to, and we did launch probably the largest e-participation and e-democracy project that has taken place so far for the upcoming European elections of 2009, June 2009. I'm leading a consortium of 3 partner institutions, the European University Institute in Florence, the 2 technological partners, Kies Kompass in Holland and Smart Vote in Switzerland, and together we're building a VAA, a voting advice application for an electoral compass, if you want, for these European elections, together with our graduate students at the Institute, who are coming from everywhere in Europe and who will help us code the stances of the parties on these different issues. So we'll have over 200 parties in their individual languages being coded on between 30 and 40 dimensions, 30 and 40 issues, and this will be then homogeneously offered to the European electorate. And we'll also add some fancy stuff, like you can see your European alter ego. So we'll have an algorithm that tells you who in Europe has exactly the same views than you do on those dimensions that can be compared across Europe. I am scientifically interested in that because we add a questionnaire to it, and we will be able to learn a lot about the impact of these systems. We know that millions of people use it, but we don't know whether this changes their opinion. You might be a conservative voter, and you find out that actually you're not so conservative and that you match more with the Liberal Party. But that doesn't mean yet that you will vote for the Liberal Party. But for certain people it will. We want to find out more about that. But in any case, this project is called EU Profiler, and we're designing it right now. It's a press conference a couple of weeks ago in Brussels. And of course, it would be fantastic to work more closely with Estonia on this as well. One of my doctoral students at the EUI is actually Estonian, Christian Vassil. Some of you know him. He's from the University of Tartu, and he will write his PhD about VAAs. However, in Estonia, if Estonia is planning, I don't know, Heikki Shibul will be able to tell me, is planning on offering internet voting for the European elections next year. It's a possibility. I don't know. Is it true? Yeah? Excellent. Well, then it would be great to sit together at some point and think about this a bit more detail, because this could be very interesting to see the interaction between these innovations. As to the MP monitoring, well, this is provided by the EU Parliament, by several national chambers. The EU Profiler will allow you to register as a user, and we might try out the monitoring and yellow card system that I described before ourselves throughout the European legislature that will follow then 2009. And so those people who have registered will then might then get these yellow cards. It's not yet sure if we can do that really, because in the European Parliament only 1/3 of all votes are nominal, and we know who voted for whom. But we're projecting this at least. We have also the same thing going on in Luxembourg, where we'd like to do this, where the national elections take place at the same time and the European elections next year. On the multimedia block module, I have not much to say. They are omnipresent, we know that. And as to internet voting, the internet voting module, well, I won't say more about this either, because we'll hear about that later. So these were some of the expected effects and currently visible endeavors in the field of pre-electoral, electoral and post-electoral participation. But this is not the full picture yet. Let us for a moment try to evaluate the positive and the negative effects that these current developments produce. Let's first look at the more positive side. Overall, it is absolutely clear, I trust, that the internet led to a democratization of access to politically relevant information. Of course, information haves and information have-nots are still not distributed very equally across society, but it is undeniable that the overall number of internet users and traffic has exploded, and the same goes for the availability of political information online. I have a PhD student of mine who is writing his doctorate on precisely this topic, the digital divide, Andrea Calderaro, and he reviews and revises a very important work of Harvard professor Pippa Norris on this topic, which is now almost a decade old. Also, in developing or industrializing countries, ICTs may be prominently used in order to include more citizens into the political system and political process. As an example, I would mention the ICT-supported participatory budgeting processes in Brazil, where the small locality, well, small, 300,000, but for Brazil that's small locality of Ipatinga in the state of Minas Gerais has taken the lead in implementing, in Brazil it's above all SMS-based and mobile phone-based interaction with citizens in the participatory budgeting. That is simply because internet access is still quite rare in Brazil overall. However, everybody, not everybody, but a large majority of people have mobile phones. So in Brazil, for example, developing more on the mobile phone side makes more sense than elsewhere where you have an internet penetration which is much bigger. But generally, these changes are also continuous and do not only concern the electoral period. Secondly, participation becomes more convenient through the internet and other ICTs. Our studies of internet voting, about which Dr. Guido Schwert will say more this afternoon, has clearly shown that this is an important factor, not only in Estonia, but also, for example, in Switzerland. Thirdly, new forms of political participation become possible. One can, for example, see this in the transnationalization of political participation thanks to the internet and mobile phones. Think of the global protest against the war in Iraq. Think about the global mobilization in favor of Tibet and against the Olympic Games, the global petitioning efforts of Amnesty International or of Greenpeace, etc. These are new forms of mobilization which have led to the explosion of the scale and width of participation. Again, these are developments which take place continuously and not just in periods of elections. Fourthly, new and non-mediated political networks are created thanks to ICTs. You all know about the social network systems like Facebook, Orkut, MySpace, and others. Similarly, political Facebooks, MySpaces, etc. are created and could be further developed. For example, in the context of the EU profiler, we're thinking about this. I mentioned this European alter ego idea, where actually the data you put in matches with all the data that everybody has put in, and you will see on a map in Europe where it is nicer for you to live, because you're surrounded by more people that think like you. You can also have your, like, where is your political enemy, the guy who has actually said no to, or the inverse of what you have been saying. Anyway, but think about these people having registered and would actually like to get in contact with each other. And if you think about the millions of users that we're expecting throughout Europe, we will have quite a lot of matches or quasi-matches. And of course, this could then lead to even connecting these people that would then like to take action, political action, because they share the same profile. And this will create maybe digital parties that one could think of, which are transnational. Fifth, and as I already mentioned in the beginning of this talk, ICTs help stimulating political interest, especially among the younger citizens. I have currently 2 PhD students, Yvette Peters and Kat Smets, who are trying to better tackle these phenomena of youth political participation. Finally, ICTs can be used to permanently consult citizens. Both top-down consultations and bottom-up initiatives can be fostered through ICTs. I won't say more here because as Estonia is a prime example of this trend with the development of the TOM and now the TID plus developments, and we will hear much more about that later today. Let's have also a look at the slightly more negative side of this. First, the often advanced argument of inclusion is not achieved fully in every case. One cannot deny that information and communication technologies lead to the establishment of e-savvy citizens, or e-citizens if you want, who are able to make more out of the offer than others. So the creation of a digital elite is therefore probably inevitable. Secondly, Chicago law professor Cass Sunstein has published last year his 2nd edition of Republic.com, very influential book. He now added 2.0 to Republic.com, and in which he continues to defend the idea of balkanization of politics because of the internet. More and more identically thinking people, I just mentioned them before, more and more identically thinking people get connected, which is not bad per se, but what Sunstein means by balkanization is that they are closed groups and they are not getting in interaction with others. They are ignoring what is said around them, which differs from their own opinion. So in an ideal deliberation, for example, this would not be very good, because you don't have deliberation there, simply. And that from democratic, theoretical democracy, theory of democracy considerations, this would not be ideal. And third, there is the chance of the development of what I call a paparazzi democracy. Well, what is this? Well, it seems to me that even a few years ago, mainstream traditional media, and we have media exponents here, they can prove me wrong, but traditional media such as TV stations, radio stations, and the print media, they were dictating what was news and what was not. There were decisions taken, what is news and what is not. This rather static, often top-down, rigid and not very interactive websites from the Web 1.0 generation were reproducing, discussing and commenting the news once they hit the public. But this is quite radically changing, I believe. What can be observed today already, and not only in the US, might well become a reality on a more general scale. In fact, it's the fact that news is increasingly produced on the internet, with the traditional media actors lagging behind. In fact, there are now TV web shows, columns of what's going on in the internet, in newspapers, etc., in the traditional media. So more and more often do we hear as a source of information some HTTP address. Worse, an ever-growing part of the audience turns to sites such as YouTube for their preferred channel of information. stemming from so-called citizens' videos and blogs. In the US, already last year, there was over a quarter of all interviewed citizens between 19 and 50 or 55 years old, don't have the figure here precisely, who declared that these citizens-generated news are their main source of information, and not what was coming from traditional media. So I am not predicting any breakdown of traditional media, but the challenge of a potential inversion of the flow of information and therefore of market share and power is clearly out there. By the way, this is both good and bad news to the quality of democracy. On the one hand, this is good news, as media pluralism and transparency is on the rise. I mean, I'm living in Silvio Berlusconi's Mediaset environment, but it is bad news as the quality and accuracy of content is often dismal and doubtful. Even if we were not yet there, I believe that we're slowly heading towards so-called paparazzi democracy, where scandals, scoops, breaking news are citizen-generated, commented and digested. And this, of course, backfires on candidates and on parties in elections, as the latter have to embrace the technology in their campaigns. As one of Hillary Clinton's advisors recently put it, because of YouTube and other 2.0 applications, campaigning becomes very difficult for a candidate, because a candidate potentially is on the campaign as soon as he or she leaves her house in the morning until he or she gets back to the house in the evening. And in between these moments, the paparazzi democracy really is in full blossom. I would argue that mainstream media's impact on politics might well have reached its climax. Citizen-to-citizen generated news weakens the filtering and control power of traditional media. Now, what Bernard Manin, again my French colleague, called an audience democracy is replaced by the paparazzi democracy, where paparazzis and voyeurs are one and the same, namely the individual members of the broader public. Finally, let me simply mention potential abuse. We know, for example, that illegal extreme right-wing and neo-Nazi movements, for example, use ICTs a great deal in order to organize themselves, and with the police often lacking behind. Before concluding, because I think I'm over time now, change of the nature of participation is a little bit on balance here. The nature of participation is changing. Whether this is pro or a con is not in every case clear, but it's true that the nature changes. And something that can be observed is this velocity of information diffusion, which has good and bad aspects to it. Good aspects because, of course, you get immediately informed as a citizen of what is going on. Bad ones because you have to get immediately informed about what is going on, and often do not have the time to reflect on political choices. To conclude, very briefly, when talking about e-participation, we have always to remember that this is still the beginning. We're at the very beginning of what can be done, what should be done, what should not be done. The variance out there is still huge. Looking at this globally is almost impossible unless you you go up the ladder of abstraction a lot. The variance is still huge there. What happens here in Estonia, for example, with the TOM and the TID Plus may or may not happen elsewhere. The same will, but the same way. We don't know enough about the diffusion effects of these innovations, etc. But we know that it is going on a bit everywhere. And let me finally say that we always have to remain critical when it comes to e-participations. It's clearly not the panacea for all our problems with democracy. It may help, it may also destroy in certain cases. Most of this is still at the experimental stage, and we need experiments in order to be able to evaluate the impact before we can fully implement these changes which affect our democracies. So thank you very much for your attention, patience, and hope you get getting your comments. Thanks.